Portfolio ops is becoming table stakes, but there's kind of the expensive people-heavy way to do it, and there's the more efficient way to do it.
What if your private equity firm could unlock a new level of deal sourcing by tapping into the full potential of your portfolio operations team? Imagine using your existing assets not just to support portfolio companies, but to actively drive deal flow. In today's episode, my co-host Dan and I are joined by Kate Hopkins, the founder and CEO of OneGuide. Kate has been at the forefront of helping private equity firms build and leverage top-tier portfolio operations teams. Today, she'll share her insights on how firms can integrate portfolio operations into their sourcing strategy, utilize their network, content, and events to supercharge their deal flow.
Hey, how can we provide value creation in our portfolio without hiring more FTEs onto the portfolio ops team?
In this episode, you'll learn how portfolio operations teams can enhance your sourcing strategy.
How do we build a tech stack that provides automation efficiency to sourcers?
The impact of content and events in building relationships and driving deal flow.
They can see the other people who are in it. They can see the events that you're having. They can see the content you've allowed them to see.
And the strategies to effectively integrate ops teams with business development.
The other place that portfolio ops can get involved is on the softer, more product marketing side, less of the tech and more of the content.
Get ready to dive into how you can maximize the value of your portfolio operations and deal sourcing. This is Deal Sorcery.
Kate, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
I've really been looking forward to this episode, because you just have such an amazing background in portfolio operations. Like, you and I have had so many great conversations about sourcing. And I think it's high time that we share with the world so what I think of as like the magical unlocks that OneGuide has for private equity firms, especially for ones that don't have, portfolio operations teams or maybe haven't optimized their portfolio operations. But before we get into that, for people that haven't met you before, maybe you can lay a little bit of the groundwork for us. Like, what was your experience in private equity before OneGuide, and like how and why did you start OneGuide?
Yeah, so I had that kind of classic portfolio operations journey. I was a Bain consultant, went to business school, and then went into portfolio operations at a lower middle market firm called Mainsail Partners. And I spent 5 years there working with B2B software companies before seeing, through my experience and through talking to peers. So a lot of my MBA friends at other firms and my consulting friends at other firms that were in similar seats, those portfolio operations seats, were having some of the same challenges piecing together kind of different pieces of software. Most of us were on pretty lean teams. We wish we had almost fractional support in certain areas. And so I left to go start OneGuide to build that. So we are a vertical solution for PE and VC firms with lean portfolio operations teams to kind of help those firms get leverage through technology, a network of experts, and fractional services.
That's awesome. So, and I've had the pleasure of serving as a OneGuide expert, and we've had some really cool conversations through that, supporting, for instance, portfolio companies for some of OneGuide's customers. But maybe you could give the 30, what's the elevator pitch, the one-liner that you give for folks? You say, here's OneGuide in one sentence.
Yeah. So portfolio ops is becoming table stakes, but there's kind of the expensive people-heavy way to do it, and there's the more efficient way to do it. And so we help firms do that more efficient, higher leverage portfolio ops, tapping into things that are non-FTEs, whether that's advisors within your firm's advisors, whether that's knowledge that you can document and make searchable, whether that's our network of 150 tactical experts in things like sourcing M&A add-ons, and identifying, hey, how can we provide value creation in our portfolio without hiring more FTEs onto the portfolio ops team?
So, and I said this at the top of the podcast, is this the right way to describe it? Because I kind of think of you guys as the masters of portfolio operations management and portfolio engagement. Is that the wrong way to say it?
No, that's a great way to say it. We work with dozens of firms that are all doing this. So we are an aggregator of, hey, what are some best practices in portfolio operations? And then we also, provide some support to each firm's strategy in executing their sort of portfolio ops mission.
That's awesome. One other question, just thinking about obviously you spend a lot of time with private equity partners and leaders of firms today. What do you hear are their biggest pain points, right? broadly, related to portfolio operations, related to sourcing? Like, what do you hear from private equity firms in terms of what their big pain points are?
Yeah. So the ones where we get pulled in are, hey, we have a growing portfolio for a number of reasons. One, our firm is getting older. We're having stacked funds. Our funds are getting bigger. There's a lot of reasons, and our hold periods are getting longer. So particularly in the last couple of years, there have been fewer exits, which means that hold periods are extending, which means you have more portfolio companies. So like one of the big challenges / opportunities that we get plugged into is portfolios are getting bigger, but usually you don't want to scale your team linearly. And so how do you do that? That's one biggie. The other thing that's happening simultaneously is that the competition for really interesting investments is getting more intense. And so this bleeds over, extremely into sourcing, but increasingly portfolio ops is not just about value creation. It's also about showing to attractive investments that you bring more than money to the table. And that's increasingly a piece of, it's a bigger and bigger piece of mindshare of the portfolio ops people that we're working with, because their investing partners are applying more and more pressure that, hey, we need to demonstrate the differentiated value that we bring to the table.
More than just a check. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm super excited for double clicking into a bunch of that stuff throughout the episode here. One of the things we were talking about a few minutes ago, and we talked about at the top of the hour, is like how do we think about the intersection between portfolio ops and sourcing, which I think is kind of the meat of this conversation. I remember it's funny. I was thinking back to a few months back when we did this like Ask Me Anything event, right? And we put together some of these frameworks around like how do we map add-on priorities for portfolio companies. And I remember we said, as we're building this out, we're saying, okay, well, when you want to build your list of companies, you want to figure out your priorities. Like, don't forget to talk to all the leaders at all your portfolio companies. But I realized we totally blew it because like we did not at all discuss the fact that this huge and obvious value additive piece of like, go talk to your ops team. I think that was just this huge miss inside of our framework there. So maybe like before we miss anything else there, what are the ways that portfolio ops teams should be supporting sourcing teams or working or collaborating with sourcing teams? Like, what have you seen any specific examples that you've seen work really well?
Yeah. So I think increasingly sourcing and the firm's brand is part of why portfolio ops exist. It's sort of the core of why portfolio ops exists is to accelerate value creation so that the company at exit is worth more than it was at investment, even, accelerate the degree to which the company is worth more at exit than it was at investment. That's the number one reason. But a close second is to be able to get into, to be the firm of choice in competitive deals. And so in order to do that, you need to expose what are if you choose to partner with us, dear interesting prospect company, here's what's going to be valuable. And there are lots of ways to socialize that. And they kind of vary depending upon where you are in the sourcing funnel. So at the very top of the funnel, it's content thought leadership. So all of the stuff that you're doing for your portfolio companies a lot of firms are starting to document really interesting IP for their portfolio companies. Like, for example, in Q4, every B2B software investor is going to have portfolio companies that are thinking about annual sales planning, capacity planning, quota, and compensation. And a lot of firms have really interesting insights that they can share with their portfolio companies on, here's what we're seeing in terms of quota and compensation trends. Here's what we recommend in terms of planning processes that have really worked. Here's what we see in our companies that have the most accurate buttoned up forecasting. And they're sharing that, sort of from their most sophisticated companies to the rest of their portfolio. But there's no reason that you shouldn't share that with your prospects as well, because that's valuable stuff. And it doesn't detract from your portfolio or from anything to share it with prospects as well. So document that stuff and put it out there. Put it on your website, put it on your LinkedIn, put it into different content form factors. So you might, for your portfolio companies, have a really in-depth 10-page guide that includes a bunch of examples and maybe some stuff that you want to keep in the family. But you can repurpose that into, a smaller blog post or things you put on LinkedIn or things that you put into outreach sequences that your sourcing team is sending. Like, hey, it's Q4. We know that all of these prospects are also thinking about annual planning. Offer them some of these insights. And then the next layer down is, to the extent that you have any relationship with a prospect company, you can start inviting them to virtual events. So if you're doing, I'll just keep using the same analogy. It's Q4, we're doing a sales planning event. There's no reason not to invite CEOs, CROs, CFOs, who are all going to be a part of that process at prospect companies to join we call them virtual roundtables. So the virtual roundtable that you're having for your portfolio companies, and let those prospects also benefit from the knowledge that you're curating and sharing with your portfolio. And the cool extra benefit is that prospect feels like they're being invited into the club of your portfolio. And so they also get to see, oh, interesting. This is the knowledge that I get access to, but here are the peers that I get access to. And then as you get deeper into the funnel, it starts to make sense to do one-on-one stuff where you might introduce that prospect company to a member of your operating team. So if you had a center of excellence leader who was really knowledgeable in an area that they valued, you might introduce them. Or if you have an advisory board member or an operating partner who is, really deep in their industry or functionally relevant, you might start making one-on-one introductions. And then probably the deepest part of the funnel that you'd reserve for, or the most expensive type of ops exposure they'd probably reserve for low funnel prospects, is in-person stuff, where either you're sending some of your ops team to them, or you're bringing them in and presenting with your ops team, or you're inviting them to an in-person event like an executive summit. And so you can't be doing that with 20 companies a quarter, but you can be doing it with a couple of really high value prospects.
So many good points there, right? And I feel like it's probably underutilized as it relates to sourcing, right? Like leveraging portfolio ops for sourcing, because a lot of those points, I was flashing back to the things I did over the years, and I'm like, yep. Like that's like for instance, number one thing, I know your perspective is that like the most valuable thing portfolio ops can do is improvement on the portfolio. From my perspective, the most valuable thing that portfolio ops does is that it exists and that I can use it as a selling point. Like that was, honestly, to me, that was the number one value of portfolio ops. Like at Cerner, we had our growth team, right? The fact that I could point to our growth team and I could say to any one of our prospects, I could say 30% of our FTEs are dedicated resources to our portfolio, where, you got something you want to work on, put in the request. We're going to staff somebody against that. We've got people that, like, you can't hire these people, right? Like these are people that are working for public company level resources. And like, we're providing them for free as a dedicated resource to you as part of our investment, right? To help you, like, whatever, grow revenue, run a payments thesis, like, whatever it is. Right. And like that far and away was one of the best selling points that we had. And like, if anybody has an ops team and they're not doing that, like that, that's the low hanging fruit to me.
It does. I think it makes a ton of sense.
And then the other one, just to double click on some of these other points you had, like some of the other points, I was just writing some of these down as we were going through, is like the content piece, events, bringing in an ops team member for, a one-on-one, a virtual one-on-one, and then like an in-person one-on-one. This is a lot of really great stuff about how to work together between sourcing teams, portfolio ops teams. You've had some great comments about how portfolio ops teams can actually support sourcing teams in more of like a sales or sourcing enablement sort of way. I always loved when I could borrow, time from our growth team for, I guess you'd say dog fooding and like, fixing our own processes for how we do sourcing, because we had some real experts in go to market. But like, how have you seen firms actually, allowing or leveraging their portfolio ops teams to support sourcing? Like, do you have any really good examples of what success looks like there?
Yeah. So the analogy here, this should be really intuitive for investors in B2B companies, because B2B companies increasingly have, their sales team, but then supporting their sales team, they have a product marketing team, a sales enablement team, a sales ops team, and those can blend together. But effectively, all of those teams are helping increase sales velocity of their sellers by arming them with the right content at the right time, by training them better. And so one thing that some of the ways that applies, if you think of portfolio ops as sourcing enablement, a sales enablement team might have call scripts or objection handling. So like, hey, these are common things that if you're on a first call, we'll do training on here's how you can kind of break into this call. And that's something that, sourcing teams might have to some extent on their own. But there could also be different types of research. So if we research into a company and we know that they're hiring for a CFO, we can believe that they probably have a bunch of these pain points. And so here are the things that you can hit them with, given this data that that they're hiring for a CFO and what we've seen across all of our companies that are hiring for a CFO. Or if they have, in the same way that you might have battle cards, a sales enablement team might produce battle cards for their sales reps. A portfolio ops team could help support their sourcing team with similar types of battle cards. If they say this, you say that. The other thing that's interesting are effectively cold email collateral. So whether that's actually helping script cold email sequences. So like, hey, here's a 6-touch sequence that we help create. You can tailor it, but this is one that you can send out. Creating in the same way that a marketing team or a product marketing team at a SaaS business might be creating annual reports, downloadable white papers, little kind of snippets. One of the most successful sourcers I ever worked with was always asking me for ratios. She's like, hey, I get really positive responses from founders when I give them really concrete things. Like, it looks like you have a really lean ratio of CSMs to revenue. You might be running into these things. Here are some things. Here's some tactics that we found. Or when she could put in numbers. Typically, companies. This kind of, Dan, comes back to your point around providing data. So typically, companies in our portfolio have this type of ratio of developers to PMs for this reason. It looks like you have this ratio. There might be these things, and so kind of using data to pique their interest, and then have relevant resources that get followed on. And so kind of the last piece is probably training those associates who are doing the sourcing to make sure that they can wield these things in the right way. So a lot of firms will do brown bag lunch type of things, where it's like, hey, we want to get better at asking some smart questions early to anticipate tech diligence questions. And so we want to get our associates better up to speed with what kind of questions they can ask and what kind of answers they should look for to kind of sniff out some things that we're interested in when it comes to tech diligence. And so it requires having some understanding, and this could be coming from, if you have that center of excellence technology leader, or it could be coming from a third-party advisor, on educating your associates so that they can ask better questions, pick up on better signals. So this all kind of comes back to sales training is to associate training. Sales enablement is to, or sourcing enablement is to sales enablement. Product marketing could also be done by kind of your operations team.
And I 100% agree with all the things, and there's some really interesting nuggets in there. Like the ratios one is interesting, right? Like you're directly deriving some sort of insight that, looking at your portfolio and looking at past experience and applying that toward, a prospect. And yeah, gosh, if you can approach somebody with that sort of insight and kind of say like, here's why that matters and here's what we think we can do about it, that's huge. But you use the word could in there a lot. And like, I'm getting hung up on that because I felt that, right? Like I felt the could, and I saw the could, and I knew that like our portfolio, like our growth team could help us, but is it actually happening? Are you finding like, are people actually leveraging? Like, I know they could and they should, like, and I want to, but like, are you seeing it actually happen in effective ways where like it's incentivized or allowed or encouraged at the firm to leverage portfolio op support sourcing?
In limited ways, at most firms that we work with, in limited and growing ways. So like one of the most common are events. And so if you're having an event, say you have a group of senior advisors, one of those senior advisors is the former CFO of a public company, and he's going to be being a guest expert at a roundtable on scaling from 10 million in revenue to IPO. You absolutely can and should have a nice registration page for that, put together a nice email campaign, send it out to relevant prospects. And so one thing that I have seen firms doing really successfully is, okay, we're making this investment especially for an event, or maybe for a piece of content that we're sharing with our portfolio. Let's spin up a corresponding lightweight outreach campaign that we can do to prospects to like invite them to this event. And like, that's a fantastic starting point. this whole robust, sourcing enablement program, I haven't seen it yet, but I think it should exist. The other one that's interesting, I'm seeing more and more firms hiring portfolio ops people who have revenue operations backgrounds. And it's a nice fit because rev ops people tend to have kind of a broad go-to-market lens. They tend to be very data oriented. It's a useful, versatile portfolio ops player to have on your team. But that person is also really well positioned to facilitate some of this stuff. So I would not be surprised if we see more of it in coming years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hired, I created a new position for us at Cerent that I called sourcing operations,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
Which was effectively like that, right? It's like rev ops, right? And I feel like I don't know, Matt. We've talked about this a little bit. Like, are you seeing that as like more of like this rev ops, sourcing ops sort of person exist as a role at private equity firms?
Yeah, I mean, within the context of BD, right? So I haven't seen it as like a portfolio ops person that's going to be doing that, but certainly there are firms out there that are hiring not to find someone who's going to be out there hunting, but rather setting the rest of the team up for success in their sourcing efforts. So that's out there. It seems like kind of connecting the dots of these two things is what's like left untapped in the industry.
I know. I'm just feeling like we need to start like a rev ops like sourcing ops as a service sort of business right now.
I think it is interesting. I'm realizing there's kind of this continuum of on one side product marketing and then kind of sales enablement in the middle, and on the other side sales ops. And so I think a lot of the sourcing ops roles are doing something that I didn't talk much about, which is the tech. And that's, Dan, much more where you live, of like, how do we build a tech stack that provides automation efficiency to sourcers? And so that's hardcore sourcing ops. And I think the place where portfolio ops, so if you have a smart rev ops person on your portfolio team, they absolutely should advise on that. The other place that portfolio ops can get involved is on the softer, more product marketing side, which is more of the training, content support, less of the tech and more of the content. So that you have to have both. Or to be really, really interesting, you have both.
Are people who are taking this portfolio operations role understanding that there's that piece of marketing? Like, is that part of the job description or the expectations out of the get-go, or is it just the evolution of kind of where value is coming from?
Sometimes. So there are a lot of portfolio ops leaders who are CMOs who double hit, where they are both advising marketing leaders in the portfolio as well as responsible for firm marketing. And they often approach it from a traditional marketing standpoint where they're thinking about brand building. I think there's room to keep moving more and more into this like sourcing enablement place of how do we take those things that we're doing to build the firm's brand and operationalize them into much more tactical campaigns that our sourcing team can operationalize.
One of the things that I was pulling out of leveraging your firm's portfolio network and assets and prospecting is this idea of tapping the existing network to help with prospecting. So whether that's asking for introductions, maybe not just that, but anything beyond that. And maybe it's another area that's kind of underutilized. But do you have any thoughts on that, on how PE firms maybe can think about taking advantage of what they already have?
Yeah, so there are some tech tools out there, Hunt Club, Swarm, that exist to map connections. And I think those are interesting to explore. More that's happening from what I've seen on the VC side versus the PE side, but I suspect it will grow. Effectively, let's pool all of our LinkedIn connections of all of our partners and possibly also portfolio execs to start to find connections within our broader network. What portfolio ops teams are already doing in ways that are kind of cool are building a network for and of their portfolio and inviting prospects into it. So by that, I mean, there are a number of firms that have really robust advisory boards. LeadEdge is a really good example of this. They actually have a bunch of independent LPs who are themselves execs who are invested in their fund. I think like 100, like a lot. They have a really big network. And they use those people to advise their portfolio companies, but also within prospecting and diligence. They also use them for BD. So like, hey, we've got a portfolio company that's trying to sell into this industry. We have an advisor in that industry who can help be a bit of a river guide. So building large networks and then using them in lots of different ways to break into an interesting prospect, to convince an interesting prospect, to diligence an interesting prospect. There's some cool stuff happening there. The other is kind of in community. So if you build portfolio community and then selectively invite prospects into that community, they can kind of enjoy the community experience, get a preview of the community experience, and you can showcase some of what you will bring to the table if they become a portfolio company.
It's really interesting, right? Like I feel like we've seen this a lot in the VC space. Like some couple of the things you're talking about, particularly like the LP one. And I know I don't remember if it was Lead Edge or somebody else. There was another firm I was talking to that was telling me something similar, where it's like they had all these LPs all over the country, and part of their requirement was like they wanted their LPs to help them source, right? And I feel like I've seen and heard that a lot more in the VC space, where it's, you got a lot more LPs. It's a bunch of individuals all over the place. You don't have a huge fund, but like expectation is they're just going to bring in. Actually, I think it was in Austin. I was meeting with a VC firm down there, and they were just telling me they just had LPs all over the place, and like that was all their sourcing, right? All of their deals came from their LPs. Their LPs sent them deals, and I remember the guy was telling me that they automatically screened them, right? And they just kind of had like they had their LPs like submit criteria on each one into their system, and it automatically said, okay, this looks like a really good one. Like, let's take a meeting with them, whatever. But it seems like that, like leveraging the network for sourcing hasn't happened as much in the private equity space.
No, I think it's more, I think VC is further along the curve on that one.
Yeah. I mean, and I think we all have like, it's like, gosh, if you've ever gone to Atlanta and tried to source, like everybody knows John Yates from MMM. And so like, he's your guy. And so like, but everybody knows how to try, but like, I think outside of a few exceptions here and there, I don't think people have broadly leveraged that network for sourcing. But the second point you brought up is a really interesting one too, right? Which is like, how do you take your portfolio network and that community you've built or can build and have that be a selling point, right? Like preview, welcome to the family sort of thing, like come to family dinner and like, see if you want to be part of the family, I don't know, that feels like that feels like, gosh, every time you have, maybe firms are doing this, I don't know, like I'd love your perspective on it, but like because I don't know, how many firms do you guys support a lot of these kind of summits and stuff, right?
We support about 20. And we are being nudged in that direction. So we actually have a new piece of product functionality to serve exactly that desire, which is a guest user or a prospect user, where they're not a full portfolio company member. They don't have full access. It might be time limited. They might have certain things they can't access, but you can invite them in. You can send them, hey, Bill Smith, you've been invited to the Acme portfolio community. And they can see the other people who are in it. They can see the events that you're having. They can see the content you've allowed them to see. And then you, as the investor, because OneGuide has all kinds of event tracking, you can see all the pages they look at. You can see the way that they're engaging with your portfolio. You can be notified when they look at certain stuff, which can be a really interesting way to get insights on their developing relationship with you to inform your continued sourcing journey.
It's really interesting, right? And we've talked about this idea of events, so maybe we can like double click into this for a minute. Like, obviously, I'm looking at it all from this lens of sourcing. Obviously the combination with portfolio ops and sourcing, but what sort of events are private equity firms now hosting? Maybe we can start with like do two things, right? Like one is big picture. What are the different types of events that are being hosted across the board for portfolio ops, right? And then like two is which of those are relevant as it relates to sourcing in this conversation?
So we see, to bucket things, kind of three types of events. You've got your in-person events. So that could be like your big executive summit and or smaller functional specific summits. So for example, some firms have a big annual meeting for LPs and they also lump that in with an executive summit. Some firms have a separate executive summit. Some firms it's only CEOs. Some firms it's like CEOs, CFOs, and select execs. And then some firms also have functional summits that are separate. So like this is our people leaders summit. This is our CTO summit. So those are the in-person ones. And for those, I think you invite prospects pretty selectively. Like you're pretty committed to a prospect before you invite them to one of those. There are some firms that do kind of regional dinners. Those are much cooler to invite prospects to. They're just more casual. And so it's like, hey, we're having a dinner. I'm in Denver. We're having a dinner in Denver, and we're inviting all of our local portfolio companies and our prospect companies and some of our favorite local vendors and some of our LPs. Like it's just we're having regional meetups to kind of reinforce our presence in key markets. And those are cool to invite prospects to. The next big category events are virtual events. And those kind of come in two flavors. So most of the firms that we work with have virtual events on more or less a monthly basis. And they kind of rotate through different functions where, January is CFOs and February is marketing leaders and March is technology leaders. So it's not like you're inviting your CTOs to an event every month, but you're hitting the CTOs 2 or 3 times a year and you're kind of rotating through different functional areas. And the format that we see most commonly is we're going to have a guest expert, either somebody from your network, like it could be what we call a portfolio rock star, which is like, hey, this is the CFO who does the best annual planning process in the portfolio. And we're just going to have him share his his annual planning process. And then we're going to discuss it and ask questions about it. Another is an advisor. So like, hey, we're going to bring in somebody from our executive advisory board. The CMO is just freaking awesome. And she's going to share her ABM playbook. And then the third is bringing in a third party, which could be, hey, we're going to bring in a compensation expert to talk about trends in compensation with our people leaders. All 3 of those work really well in that you have a conversation starter who's an expert, and then you have discussion among peers. And those are all really good to invite prospects to. And all 3 of those examples are things where you could invite a founder CEO, or you could tell the founder CEO, feel free to share this with your marketing leader, which is also cool because you get a little bit plugged in deeper into the executive team of that prospect company. And there might be some virtual events that you choose not to invite prospects to. A number of our clients have closed events that aren't open to their entire portfolio. It's only to a specific group. So for example, a CEO group that is really only for portfolio company CEOs. It's more of a closed door session. And so you might not invite prospects to that. But there are a lot of these where prospects would feel really welcome in place, very much an appropriate member of the group.
And so I think you laid out that, we've got in-person events, like the big kind of functional summits and, leader summits, and again, maybe LP summit, maybe, portfolio, et cetera, and then regional dinners and virtual events. Are those the main 3 then?
Yeah, I think so. I think you would probably invite prospects to your big events selectively, to regional events much more openly if a regional dinner, and then to virtual events pretty openly with the potential caveat of some of those exclusive, CEO only type events.
Got it. Talk to me these regional, because I've seen you do some of these like regional events, right? What's the next? Like, what are is that similar to the virtual events where you've got, some sort of advisory board member or somebody giving a talk or a third party or, I think you said portfolio rock star, or is it like, what's the typical format for those regional events or regional dinners?
We do some as one guide for portfolio ops leaders. When I see our clients and firms that I respect doing them, it's most often a dinner somewhere kind of nice in that city. There's a little bit of discussion, but if it's a 2-hour event, the discussion or the presentation is like 15 minutes, and it's really mostly networking. And so, actually, it could be certainly could be longer than 15 minutes, but it's 30, 45 minutes. But it's not like this is a big conference. It's a dinner with a presentation component and a heavy networking component. And those are good ones to invite, like, hey, any of your associates that have deals in the area, maybe if they have enough deals, they fly out and they go to the dinner and they invite the people to the dinner. And you can have networking is the number 1 priority, and content is probably secondary at those events.
Got it. Okay. And so it sounds like in general for those, it's maybe a 50-50 split between portfolio and firm folks and then kind of prospects?
Yeah. So I think if we go back to the 3 categories of events, the big in-person summits are probably 99% portfolio, a couple of select prospects. The regional dinners could be close to a 50-50 mix. There might be some other people you invite. And then the virtual events are probably 80 or 90% portfolio companies, just because you've got a lot more, but you're also inviting prospects in, and you might have a couple of prospects that attend to any one event.
Have you seen folks do the regional dinners in areas where they don't have any portfolio companies? Like if I'm Like if I don't have any portcos in Chicago, but I got a bunch of prospects in Chicago, like just do a dinner in Chicago. And it's like, okay, me and a couple associates are going to go there. We're just going to invite every prospect we have in the city.
Yeah, you could probably pull that off. You need an anchor of like somebody who's, the nice thing about portfolio companies is that they're kind of your friendlies. Like you already know them, they know you. Like they're a good anchor. And so if I didn't have portfolio companies, I'd look for some other anchor, and that could be advisors who are in the area, or it could be like LPs, advisors, vendors you really like, somebody who has a tie to both the area and to you, and can kind of be your anchor.
Right, and something interesting and intriguing for your prospects, right? Like something that, yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I don't know, maybe this is pushing it too far, but like, you just go and, gosh, if I could pull in Michael Jordan for a dinner and invite a bunch of prospects, like, does that work? Like,
I mean, I don't. This is getting beyond portfolio ops, but like, yes, I would attend that dinner.
Yeah, absolutely, awesome. I think that's super helpful. How, like, of these events, obviously we're talking about portfolio ops. Can I build it around a portfolio ops person then? Like if I have...
Yeah, you probably could. Yeah, I think you definitely could. If you have, hey, say your CTO isn't actually located at headquarters, your CTO is located in Atlanta, you definitely could. And you might make it more of a technology bent. You might have more, maybe you invite the CEOs and their CTOs, and it's more of a tech-minded discussion.
Because I was just thinking about, like, for instance, when I was at Cerent, like Craig Foose, one of our rock star, portfolio growth team members, like lives in Pittsburgh, and so I was like, hey, like let's do a night out with Craig in Pittsburgh. I'll pull in, all my prospects in Pittsburgh. Like, I don't know. I feel like that could work.
I think it would. The interesting thing is, even coming out of COVID, people are hungry to meet up in person, but it's not being done to death. And so I think there's still like significant appetite to go and meet with people in, physical spaces.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes a ton of sense. So kind of wrapping up this events piece here, obviously you mentioned, this breakdown of like, for the big in-person ones, 99% is going to be, portfolio and kind of in-house people. Maybe it's, up to 50-50. There's a lot of different splits you could have for these sort of regional events, and then the webinars and online stuff, like do whatever split kind of makes sense there. Are there any other pro tips for folks around running an event that includes both portcos, portfolio ops folks, and prospects? Like, have you seen anything like go terribly wrong if it's like if you make the wrong assumption or invite the wrong people or have the wrong dynamic?
No, I think with any event, having a buttoned up event planning process goes a long way. And this is honestly where some of One Guide services come in. We act as an event coordinator for a lot of these virtual events, because there's just logistics that you don't think about that make an event go more smoothly. So for a virtual event, we usually plan the events quarterly so that you can get the experts locked in with at least a month notice, so that you can kind of get that person's calendar held. And then you identify who's the invite list, and you make sure that they get invites at least 2 weeks before, and then they get a reminder. And then you're kind of tracking to make sure you have a good yield, because you want a big enough group that you're going to have a quorum, but not too big a group that it becomes just a webinar. And then you want to ensure good attendance. You absolutely need to make sure that all those people get a calendar invite. So either if they register, they get a calendar invite, or it gets on their calendar. And then the reminder cadence that we find most effective is day before, hour before recap. It's great to solicit feedback. You always want to send a recap page. So part of it is just the drumbeat of like, they know what it is. They know that what they're signed up for. They know who else is going to be there. They know what to expect. They get the recap. You have this kind of, it is awkward if you like plunk one event onto a prospect's calendar, but if you give them the sort of preamble and the follow-up, it's going to be much more impactful. Ditto if you do it in person. So for an in-person event, you need more lead time for scheduling. You have to lock down the logistics of like the physical space. You want to pick somewhere. So in a really sprawly place like Dallas, Fort Worth, you're going to have to think about like, where are these companies? Because some of them probably aren't going to commute across the entire metroplex. So like, how do you think about concentrations and finding places people will come to, picking the right time of week and day? For example, in Boston, there's a holiday in March or April that's Patriots Day. All of Boston is like on vacation. I didn't realize this was a thing. I tried to schedule something on Patriots Day. It's not a holiday in Denver. It is in Boston. See, like there's more logistics you have to think through. And then for in-person events, I really like sending a who's coming kind of pre-email so that people can see who are the other people they can come and network with, both to get them excited, to encourage attendance, and again, just to kind of make sure they know what they're coming for. Like, hey, here's the guest expert who's going to talk about X. Here are the other people who are coming who you can network with. I think over communication is really good for having a positive event outcome.
Makes a ton of sense. I mean, can I just, hire one guide for doing my regional dinner?
Not yet. We don't do in-person. We do virtual events. We will facilitate virtual events. We don't have the ability to do in-person events in all these different regional areas, but we're glad to share all of our best practices.
Because that feels like another, we're just drumming up business opportunities here. Like if I as a sourcing leader can be like, hey, I want to have 6 regional dinners this year in these 6 cities.
Yeah.
Ready, set, go. That'd be huge.
Yeah. I'm happy to share our playbook. We're a small team in Denver and I guess Ohio. Maybe we can help you out in Ohio. We've got a couple people there.
That's awesome.
Kind of dovetailing on that last piece, the anchor aspect, like I guess the thing that pulls people in to want to attend those events is maybe easier said than done, right? Like an idea of let's have this many events per quarter in all these different cities, but you have to actually get the prospects there. While maybe there are PE firms that aren't taking advantage of some of the stuff we're talking about, there is still a ton of noise that good prospects are receiving. And so it's not as easy as like we found, we got a reservation at Carbone and now we're going to get everybody to come and attend. So yeah, I think it just kind of reinforces a lot of what you've talked about today. And from a sourcing perspective, the ops team can help inform the BD professionals to just be more equipped at breaking through all that noise and convincing the prospects to think about having a conversation, starting a dialogue with the firm.
I really agree. And I think that's a place ops can continue to expand into as that sourcing mandate becomes more and more important in the why portfolio ops exists.
Totally. Well, so it seems like the big pieces here, at least what we've talked about today, just went through events, but content is also a huge piece. So maybe we can kind of touch a bit more on some of the specifics there. But I guess just like you walk through a couple of different types that firms will utilize and portfolio ops groups will produce. What sorts of content get the biggest bang for the buck?
You always want to start meaty and tactical. And so you might reuse the same piece of content on a topic for a couple different audiences. And so you want to start with the most in-depth. So for example, let's say you were going to do a benchmarking report where you were going to go aggregate a bunch of SaaS KPIs and org data from all of your portfolio companies. And you're a PE firm with 15 portfolio companies. You're going to go to each of them and you're going to get this really nice apples to apples benchmarking data. So internally, you can look at all of it, nothing anonymized, all of the names. And that's really interesting. So in your next portfolio review, this is going to be a really cool piece of content. The next layer out is what do you share with the CEOs and CFOs of those portfolio companies? And you probably share most of it. You anonymize it, but you say, hey, here's where you sit relative to our other portfolio companies. And by the way, here are some playbooks that based on where you sit, we think you might want to run. So like, hey, compared to these other portfolio companies, your CAC is a little high. Here are some things that some of our other portfolio companies are doing where they're having lower, cost per close. And these could be interesting plays for you to try. So it can be a really detailed piece of information, maybe multiple pieces of information kind of tailored to that portfolio company. It's a lot of content, but you have a deep relationship with them. And so they're going to look at it. And then as you start to get to prospects, you're probably not going to share them. Here's our whole benchmarking report, but you can turn it into more digestible pieces of content. We often see in-depth, we call them guides, guides. These are like 10-page pieces of content that are most often consumed by the portfolio, sometimes by prospects if it's a tactical thing. But let's be real, if you're getting a sourcing email, how often are you going to open the PDF and look through a 10-page in-depth document? You're not. You then take that benchmarking report and you pull it into maybe a blog post that's like insights from our benchmarking report, and then maybe a bunch of, coming back to that idea of ratios, a bunch of snippets that maybe they're visual and they could be copy and pasted as an image into an email that kind of breaks things up. Or maybe they are honestly just kind of bullet point snacks that your associates can put into emails like, hey, we did this big benchmarking report. Here were some of the things that we found. Here were some of the tactics of of our portfolio companies that had the best metrics across these areas. And those types of data snacks could also be in kind of LinkedIn social media. So you take the same piece of meaty content and you kind of parse it up as you get further and further from your core of active portfolio companies.
I've got to start using that, data snacks. That's probably one of my favorite terms.
We'll make it happen. Data snacks.
Data snacks. It's a thing. It's happening.
I think I got it from somebody. I can't remember who.
It's yours now.
And so are you finding like, are people then, you mentioned like data snacks you share on LinkedIn, right? And then, is it then like, I know you mentioned like, hey, I'm not going to send a big 10 or 20 slide PDF because nobody's going to open that. But like, how are folks kind of using that content?
You can turn the content. So if you're trying to use the content in prospecting, so if you want to use the content in marketing, you're breaking it into blog posts and data snacks. If you want to use it in prospecting, like cold outreach campaigns, you're turning it into smaller assets that somebody can flip through quickly. Like if you imagine you're going to get 3 minutes of mind share, like what could you draw their attention to in a couple minutes? Or coming back to events. So you can do a readout of your benchmarking data in an event to which you invite prospects. And that's another really good way to bring it back.
Yeah. I mean, that feels like it could make a ton of sense, right? Like just do a virtual event where you're, walking through like trends we're seeing in, whatever ratio you want to talk about or whatever other data. Yeah. That's interesting.
Makes sense. That's great. Thank you, Kate. Dan, you have anything?
No, I think this has been a great discussion, right? Like I'm super excited just coming out of this about like all this low-hanging fruit that I feel like exists for folks out there, right? Around, how to leverage portfolio ops, your network, et cetera, for sourcing. We started to do some of these things, but I know that like there was a lot of opportunity to do it a lot better. And I think, not to say that Sarant was leading the charge, but I think there's a lot of other firms that like aren't as far evolved in that. And so I'm extremely excited about the opportunities that exist here. It's kind of the short of it, right? Like
I am too. Let's keep partnering to find them.
I love it. For anybody that wants to learn a little bit more about OneGuide, what should they do? Where should they go?
Yes, absolutely. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm Kate Hopkins, or our website is askoneguide.com, ASKONEGUIDE.
There you have it, folks. Kate Hopkins, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.